Ma'am, the ID your husband provided for the woman in maternity room 412 doesn't match your face. The admitting clerk at St. David's Hospital slid my driver's license across the sterile laminate counter. I looked at the plastic card. Then I looked at the clerk. My husband checked a woman in under my name? 2 hours ago, the clerk said, her eyes dropping to her keyboard. He said his wife was in active labor. He used your insurance profile. I walked to the elevator. I pressed 4. I walked down the linoleum hallway. My hands were entirely empty. Room 412. The heavy wooden door was cracked open. My husband of 8 years, Vance, was sitting on the edge of the hospital bed. He was holding the hand of a young blonde woman. She was sweating. Her stomach was massive. I pushed the door open. Vance turned. His face went the color of wet cement. He dropped her hand like it was covered in acid. He sprinted across the room, grabbed me by both shoulders, and physically shoved me backward into the hallway. He slammed the door shut behind us, pinning me against the wall. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he hissed. His fingers dug into my collarbones. "You don't belong here. Go home and wait for me to explain." I was 31. I was wearing my blue work blazer. I had just driven across Austin in rush hour traffic because his coworker called to say he left the office in an ambulance. "She's having a baby," I said. "She's having my baby," Vance said. "And if you ruin this day for me, I will make sure you leave this marriage with absolutely nothing." He turned his back on me and walked right back into the room. But to understand how I ended up pinned against a hospital wall while my husband held another woman's hand, I have to take you back. I am an insurance claims investigator. I spend my days looking at burned-out warehouses, collapsed retaining walls, and flooded commercial basements, figuring out who is lying. I look at the jagged, blackened edges of burn patterns to determine the exact origin point of a fire. I look at the faint, chalky residue of water lines to see if a flood was natural, or if someone left a commercial valve open on purpose. I look for the truth in ruined things. I am trained to notice the subtle, microscopic inconsistencies in a story. I never thought to look for those inconsistencies in my own kitchen. Vance was a regional director for a mid-sized logistics company. We met at a crowded, suffocatingly warm coffee shop on South Congress when I was 22. The Texas summer heat was radiating off the pavement outside, and the air conditioning inside was struggling. He bumped my table. He spilled an entire plastic cup of iced coffee onto my leather laptop bag. The dark liquid pooled around my spreadsheets. He didn't panic. He just smiled, handed me a stack of rough brown paper napkins, and paid for the dry cleaning. He bought me dinner that night at a steakhouse I couldn't afford. He was charming, aggressively loud, and entirely sure of himself. I was quiet. I liked order. I liked the predictable geometry of spreadsheets. I liked knowing exactly where things belonged and why they were there. Vance was the chaotic, vibrant energy I thought I needed to balance my rigid life out. For the first 5 years, we built a solidly upper-middle-class life in Austin, Texas. We bought a limestone house in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. We adopted a golden retriever mix named Buster. We hosted Sunday dinners that became the anchor of our social circle. To the outside world, Vance was the ultimate husband. He was the guy who brought the expensive, slow-smoked brisket to the neighborhood block party. He was the guy who climbed up on a ladder to help the elderly neighbors clean wet leaves out of their gutters. But there was always a hum of cruelty underneath the charm. It was subtle, a low-frequency vibration. The kind of thing you only notice if you are the one living inside the house, feeling the floorboards shake. It was most obvious during those Sunday dinners. I can still recall the exact sensory overload of those evenings. The thick, sweet smell of hickory wood smoke and caramelized barbecue sauce clinging to Vance's clothes. The sticky, humid texture of the Texas evening air. The wet rings of condensation left on the wooden patio table by sweating bottles of Shinerbach. Vance would stand by the grill, holding a pair of metal tongs, holding court. He would wait until the entire patio was quiet, listening to him tell a story, and then he would use me as the punchline. "Tamsin couldn't make it to the grocery store today," he would announce to our friends, his voice booming over the sizzle of the meat. "She was too busy interrogating a poor warehouse manager about a leaky pipe. She looks at burned-out buildings all day, folks, so you can imagine she's an absolute joy to come home to." The neighbors would laugh. It was a forced, polite laughter, but it fed him. I would sit in my wrought-iron patio chair, feeling the metal grid pressing into the back of my thighs, and I would bite the inside of my cheek until I tasted the sharp metallic tang of copper. He had a habit of sighing loudly, a heavy, theatrical exhalation, whenever I talked about my day. If I mentioned a tough case at work, he would look down at his phone, his thumb endlessly scrolling, and say, "You interrogate me like one of your insurance frauds, Tamsin. Turn it off." Whenever we argued in private, he used the exact same 3 phrases. It was a script. "You're living in a fantasy." "Stop interrogating me. I'm the victim here." My Uncle Silas lived out in Dripping Springs, at the end of a long, dusty gravel road. He was a retired diesel mechanic who spent his days in a corrugated steel garage rebuilding old Ford engines. His hands were permanently stained with black grease, and his garage always smelled sharply of motor oil, ozone, and ancient sawdust. Uncle Silas never quite liked Vance. He watched Vance with the quiet, unblinking assessment of a man who knows when an engine block is cracked beyond repair. At our wedding reception, while the bass from the DJ's speakers rattled the floorboards of the rented hall, Uncle Silas pulled me aside. He handed me a glass of ice water, looked at Vance laughing loudly across the room, and delivered his signature line. "Tamsin, a dog that bites the mailman will eventually bite you, no matter how much you feed it." I didn't listen. I was young. I thought love was simply a matter of feeding the dog until it felt safe enough to stop biting. I had a dream I parked for Vance. I wanted to buy a vintage 1974 Airstream trailer. I wanted to gut the rotted interior, rebuild it with my own hands, polish the aluminum shell until it looked like a mirror, and spend a year traveling the country. I had the blueprints painstakingly drawn up on heavy, textured drafting paper. I had a dedicated savings account at a local credit union. When I showed Vance the rolled-up plans on the evening of our 3rd anniversary, he laughed. It wasn't a chuckle. It was a deep, resonant, mocking laugh that echoed off the high ceilings of our kitchen. "Tamsin, you're an investigator," he said, reaching out and patting my cheek with a patronizing firmness. "You don't build things. You just look at things after they're already broken. Leave the dreaming to me." I rolled the heavy paper back up. I put the rubber band around it. I placed it in the bottom drawer of my mahogany desk. I left it there in the dark for 5 years. The poison started leaking into the water supply about 14 months before the hospital. It started, as it always does, with the phone. For 7 years, Vance's phone lived face up on the kitchen granite. He didn't even have a passcode. Anyone could bump the screen and see his notifications. Then, one Tuesday in October, the phone started living face down. The screen was always pressed flush against the stone. When I asked him about it, he didn't just answer the question. He attacked the premise of the question. "I have highly sensitive proprietary logistics data on here now," he snapped, his jaw clenching. "You're living in a fantasy if you think I'm hiding something from you. Stop interrogating me." Then came the gym membership. Vance hadn't lifted a free weight or run on a treadmill since his sophomore year of college. Suddenly, he was going to a boutique, high-intensity fitness studio in downtown Austin 4 nights a week. His physical scent changed. The man who had used a cheap, neon blue, 3-in-1 shampoo that doubled as engine degreaser for 7 years suddenly cared about exfoliants. He started buying organic eucalyptus body wash. The sharp, medicinal smell of the eucalyptus would billow out of the master bathroom every morning, replacing the familiar scent of his old soap. Then, the social changes began. He started mentioning a new hire at his company, Cleo. "Cleo completely messed up the quarterly regional report," he would say, aggressively chopping vegetables for dinner. "Cleo doesn't even know how to use the break room espresso machine. Cleo is so incredibly naive, it's a liability to the department." He talked about how annoying she was so frequently, with such intense irritation, that I genuinely thought he hated her. I didn't realize that complaining about her was a psychological release valve. Talking about how much he despised her was the only way he could safely say her name out loud in our house without arousing suspicion. Then came the fracture moment, the moment my investigator's gut screamed at me, and I violently forced it to shut up. It was a quiet Sunday morning. The house was still. I was doing the weekly laundry. Shut up. I walked out to the garage and pulled Vance's heavy canvas gym bag out of the trunk of his car. I carried it to the laundry room and pulled the zipper. The zipper had a specific metallic catch halfway down the track. It scraped loudly in the quiet room. I reached inside to grab his sweaty workout towels. The towels were bone dry. I rubbed the fabric between my thumb and index finger. The terry cloth was stiff. It smelled strongly of fresh, lavender-scented dryer sheets. They hadn't touched a drop of sweat. I dug deeper into the dark, synthetic nylon cavern of the bag. At the very bottom, my fingers brushed against a crumpled piece of thermal paper. I pulled it out. It was a receipt from a high-end luxury baby boutique located in the Domain Shopping Center. The ink was fresh. It was for a stuffed plush elephant. Price, $85. I walked into the living room. The television was blaring. Vance was slouched on the leather sofa, watching a college football game. "Why do you have a receipt for an $85 stuffed elephant in your gym bag?" I asked. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He didn't stutter. He muted the television, turned his head, and looked at me with an absolute, terrifying, dead-eyed calm. "It's for Mark's kid," he said smoothly. Mark was his regional vice president. Mark's wife just had a little girl on Thursday. I bought a gift on behalf of the logistics team. I'm taking it to the office tomorrow. You're being paranoid, Tamsin. You see fraud everywhere because of your job. It's actually getting sick. You need to talk to somebody about your trust issues. I stood there on the hardwood floor. I looked down at the receipt in my hand. I felt the thin, slippery texture of the thermal paper. I knew Mark's wife had just delivered a baby. The logic fit perfectly into the slot. But my gut, the exact same gut that told me when a warehouse owner had deliberately torched his own inventory, said he was lying. I chose to believe the logic. I chose to stay. That choice cost me the next 8 months of my life. The escalation after the hospital was a masterclass in psychological torture. I drove home from St. David's Hospital in complete, suffocating silence. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't roll down the windows. My hands were shaking so violently, I had to grip the leather steering wheel until my knuckles turned a sharp, translucent white. I walked into our empty, dark house. I didn't turn on a single lamp. I sat down on the living room sofa, still wearing my blue work blazer. The fabric felt heavy and restrictive. I just sat in the pitch black and watched the glowing green digital clock on the microwave change numbers. 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 4 a.m. Vance came home at 6:15 a.m. the next morning. The front door opened, the hinges whined. He walked into the kitchen, saw me sitting in the darkness of the living room, and sighed. It was that exact same heavy, annoyed, theatrical sigh he used when I talked about a tough day at work. "Look," he said, tossing his brass keys onto the granite counter with a loud clatter. "I didn't want you to find out like that. You checked her in under my name." My voice sounded like it belonged to a stranger. It was entirely hollow, devoid of any acoustic warmth. "She didn't have good insurance," he said casually, walking to the stainless steel refrigerator, opening it, and pouring himself a tall glass of orange juice. The casual domesticity of the act was staggering. "I wasn't going to let my kid be born in a hallway. It was a victimless crime. The hospital gets paid. She gets a bed." "You committed felony insurance fraud," I said, the investigator in me rising to the surface. "And you got someone else pregnant." That began the trickle truth, the slow, agonizing drip of reality, rung one. "It was a one-time mistake," Vance said, leaning against the kitchen island, taking a sip of his juice. "We got drunk after the company Christmas party at that bar on 6th Street. I slipped up. It meant nothing. She got pregnant. I'm stepping up to be a father because I'm a good man, Tamsin. We haven't touched since that night." I just stared at him through the gloom. "You bought her a stuffed elephant 6 months ago." He flinched, just a tiny microscopic muscle spasm near his left eye. A tell, rung 2. "Okay," he said, setting the cold glass down on the stone. "It was a few months, but I tried to end it. I really did. She was fragile. She threatened to hurt herself. She needed me." "You were at the hospital, holding her hand while she pushed," I said. "You looked at her like she was the center of the universe." Rung 3. "Fine," he snapped, his voice suddenly rising to a shout, echoing off the tile backsplash. 2 years. I've been sleeping with her for 2 years, and you want to know why? Because you're a robot, Tamsin. You work, you analyze, you don't nurture. Cleo looks at me like I'm a hero. You look at me like I'm a suspect." The gaslight chamber slammed shut, and the locks engaged. Over the next 3 days, Vance refused to leave the house. He slept in the guest bedroom down the hall. Every time we crossed paths in the kitchen or the hallway, he dropped a new, highly calibrated cruelty. If you had just been a warmer woman, I wouldn't have been forced to look elsewhere. You're living in an absolute fantasy if you think any normal man would stay loyal to a woman who cares more about claim files than starting a family. I'm the victim here, Tamsin. I have to manage 2 entire lives. The stress is killing me, and it's all because you couldn't fulfill one simple role. Then, the enabler started cracking. My phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon. It was Bethany, Vance's older sister. We had spent the last 8 Thanksgivings together. I had baked pies in her oven. I had bought her children Christmas gifts. "Tamsin," Bethany said. Her voice was thick with a syrupy fake pity. "Vance told me what happened at the hospital. I just want you to know our family doesn't hate you. You knew, I said. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the sternum. Well, Bethany hesitated, the guilt making her stutter. I met Cleo a few months ago, at a barbecue Vance hosted at a park. Tamsin, you have to understand where my brother is coming from. Cleo is just softer than you. She's maternal. She bakes. Vance needed that energy in his life. You're so intensely career-focused. You can't blame him for wanting a real mother for his children. I hung up the phone. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I walked into the master bathroom, locked the door, leaned over the porcelain sink, and violently threw up. When I turned on the brass faucet and rinsed the bitter taste of bile out of my mouth, I looked up into the vanity mirror. My eyes were completely, terrifyingly dry. The escalation reached its absolute peak on a Thursday evening, 2 days before he was scheduled to move out. The silence of the house was shattered by the sound of the heavy front door deadbolt turning. Vance walked in. He wasn't packing boxes. He was wearing a tailored charcoal suit, and he was carrying a thick manila folder. He walked directly into the kitchen, where I was standing by the stove, and dropped the folder onto the granite counter. The heavy stack of paper made a loud, slapping sound against the stone. What is this? I asked. It's a preliminary asset division agreement, Vance said. His voice was smooth, corporate, entirely stripped of emotion. He walked past me, opened the liquor cabinet, and poured himself a heavy measure of my expensive bourbon. I had Trent, my lawyer, draft it up today. I need you to sign it tonight. I looked at the folder. I didn't touch it. I'm not signing anything without my own legal counsel reviewing it. Vance took a sip of the bourbon. The ice clinked against the glass. He took 3 steps toward me, invading my personal space, using his height to cast a shadow over me. The smell of the alcohol and the stale coffee on his breath was suffocating. You don't need a lawyer, Tamsin. You need to be realistic, he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing register. I'm offering you a very generous exit. You keep this house, you keep your car. In exchange, I take the liquid assets in the Vanguard investment account. It's perfectly fair. You want me to sign away my half of our life savings? I asked, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. We built that account together for 8 years. I earned the lion's share of it, he lied smoothly. And frankly, I have a newborn child to provide for. I have real responsibilities now. You don't. You have a dog. He leaned in closer. His chest was almost touching my shoulder. Sign the paperwork, Tamsin. If you drag this out into a messy divorce, I promise you, I will make your life a living hell. I will call your firm. I will tell your director that you've been using proprietary insurance databases to illegally stalk me and my new family. I will ruin your professional reputation. You'll never investigate a burned-down shed again. I stood perfectly still. The compressor of the refrigerator hummed against my spine. You are trying to extort me, I said quietly. Vance laughed, a short, cruel burst of air. I'm trying to save you from yourself. Look at you. You're a machine, a cold, calculating machine. Cleo is warm. She cries when she's happy. She feels things. You didn't even cry at your own mother's funeral, Tamsin. You just organized the catering. You're broken. Sign the paper and let me go build a life with a woman who actually has a heart. He slammed his bourbon glass down on the counter. The glass shattered. Amber liquid and sharp shards of crystal exploded across the granite. He didn't clean it up. He just glared at me, turned on his heel, and walked out the front door. He didn't take the dog. Buster was hiding under my bed, trembling, terrified of the yelling and the sound of breaking glass. That night, after sweeping up the shattered crystal, I put Buster in the passenger seat of my car, drove to a 24-hour hardware store, and bought 3 heavy-duty, commercial-grade deadbolts. I drove home, got my drill, and installed them myself. As the metal screws bit into the wooden door frame, the internal click happened. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want to key his car. I didn't want to slash his tires. Tires cost $200. Vandalism is the weapon of the amateur. I wanted to dismantle his reality. I wanted to deconstruct his life down to the studs. I am an investigator. I am very, very good at my job. I started the next morning at 6 a.m. I formally took a week of paid leave from the firm. I sat at my dining room table. I opened my laptop. I set out a fresh yellow legal pad, 3 black pens, and a massive pot of black coffee. I started where every fraud investigation starts, the finances. Vance had always managed the joint investment portfolio. We had a mutual fund account with Vanguard that we had diligently built together, paycheck by paycheck, over 8 years. It was our safety net. I pulled up the Vanguard portal. I typed in the shared credentials. The dashboard loaded. The balance displayed in bold black text was $17.40. I stopped breathing. The air in the room felt instantly heavy. I clicked on the transaction history tab. I scrolled down. 3 weeks before the hospital incident, Vance had authorized a massive wire transfer. He had drained exactly $715,400 from our joint portfolio. I pulled the routing numbers from the digital receipt. I ran them through a public banking registry. The receiving bank was tied to an escrow account at a premium title company located in Westlake Hills, the most expensive zip code in the Austin area. Vance hadn't been planning to move into a rental property. He had bought a custom luxury house. He used my decade of savings, forged my digital signature on the spousal withdrawal authorization form, and bought a mansion for his mistress and his new baby. He thought he was an absolute genius. He thought because I rarely checked the Vanguard account, he could bully me into signing that separation agreement and finalize the divorce before I realized the liquid money was already gone. He was going to claim the funds were lost in a series of bad, high-risk stock trades. I didn't call him. I didn't scream. I printed the wire transfer receipt. The printer whirred and spat out the page. I placed the paper into a pristine blue folder. Next, I investigated Cleo. She was 24 years old. She had a completely public Instagram account, curated for maximum attention. She posted daily photos of her iced matcha lattes, her pastel yoga mats, and heavily filtered, sun-drenched selfies. I scrolled back chronologically, moving month by month through her digital life for the past 18 months. I noticed a distinct geographical pattern. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, Cleo checked in at a highly exclusive, invite-only fitness club in East Austin. It was the exact same club Vance had supposedly joined when he started buying the eucalyptus soap. But Cleo's photos weren't of Vance. Vance wasn't in a single frame. They were of a man named Jude. Jude was a personal trainer at the facility. He was built like a brick wall, his arms covered in intricate, traditional Japanese tattoos, and he had a smile that looked dangerously charming and entirely genuine. In a photo posted exactly 10 months ago, the exact biological window of conception, Cleo was sitting comfortably on Jude's lap on the patio of a local craft brewery. Her arm was wrapped tightly around his thick neck. The caption read, "Sweat sessions and Sunday sessions with my absolute favorite guy. #LoveHim." I cross-referenced Jude's public social media profiles. He was deeply, painfully, transparently in love with Cleo. He posted about her constantly, photos of them hiking, photos of them cooking. Then, about 7 months ago, his post abruptly turned dark. The photos of Cleo vanished. They were replaced by black and white quotes about betrayal, photos of him working out alone in an empty gym at midnight, with bitter captions about loyalty and snakes. Cleo hadn't just been sleeping with my husband. She had been sleeping with her personal trainer at the exact same time. When she got pregnant, she panicked. She had a mathematical choice to make. Jude made $50,000 a year and lived in a cramped walk-up studio apartment. Vance was a regional director with a massive joint investment account, a luxury car, and a 6-figure salary. Cleo picked the bank account. She dumped Jude, went to Vance, and told him he was the father. I found Jude's business email address on his personal training website. I sent him exactly one line. "I am Vance's wife. We need to talk about Cleo's baby." Jude met me at Epoch Coffee on North Loop 2 days later. It was raining heavily outside. The coffee shop smelled of roasted espresso beans, damp wool sweaters, and wet concrete. Jude walked through the door looking like a man who hadn't slept a full night in a week. Dark purple bags hung under his eyes. He spotted me, walked over, and sat down heavily across from me, in a cramped vinyl booth. "I thought she loved me," Jude said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He stared down at the black coffee in his paper cup, as if the answers were floating in the oil slick on top. "We were together for a solid year. We talked about getting married. Then she got pregnant, completely vanished for 2 weeks, blocked my number, and finally called me crying. She said she was moving in with some rich logistics guy because it was better for the child." "Vance," I said quietly. "Yeah, Vance." Jude clenched his massive tattooed fists on the table. "Yeah." The knuckles popped. "I told her I wanted a paternity test. I begged her for one. She threatened to call the Austin police and file a report saying I was a deranged stalker. She said her new boyfriend had expensive lawyers who would bury me." "Jude?" I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the sticky wooden table. Vance drained $715,400 of my money to buy her a house. He blew up my 8-year marriage. He thinks he won. Jude looked up. His dark eyes locked onto mine. What do you want to do? I want the truth, I said. And I need your help to physically get it. We made a plan. A clinical, precise plan. Jude knew Cleo's daily schedule by heart. He knew she still went to a specific high-end organic juice bar in Westlake every Wednesday morning at 10 a.m., right after her postnatal yoga appointments. Vance was always locked in regional executive meetings at his office on Wednesday mornings. The following Wednesday, the Texas heat was already sweltering by 9 a.m. Jude parked his truck in the back of the juice bar parking lot and waited. At 10:05 a.m., Cleo's white SUV pulled into a spot near the front door. When Cleo walked inside the store to order her smoothie, she left the newborn baby strapped into the car seat in the back. She left the engine off, the doors locked, but she rolled the back windows down 4 inches to let the breeze in, because she was fundamentally careless. Jude didn't break into the car. He didn't have to trigger an alarm or smash a window. Jude had ordered a premium, legally admissible DNA testing kit from a certified laboratory. He walked up to the side of the SUV. He reached his thick, tattooed arm through the 4-inch gap in the cracked window. His hand hovered over the sleeping infant. With absolute gentleness, Jude popped the rubber pacifier out of the sleeping baby's mouth. He took the long, sterile medical swab from the plastic tube, gently rubbed it against the inside of the baby's cheek for 10 seconds to collect the epithelial cells, and then carefully put the pacifier back into the baby's mouth. The child didn't even stir. Jude pulled his arm back, swabbed his own cheek right there in the glaring sun of the parking lot, sealed both samples in the tamper-proof vials, and drove straight to the FedEx office. He mailed the kit to the lab that afternoon using priority overnight shipping. We waited 14 days. During those 14 agonizing days, Vance texted me constantly. His messages were a barrage of arrogance. My lawyer is drafting the final divorce papers. Sign them when they arrive. I expect you to vacate the house by the end of the month so we can prep it for sale. Cleo picked out new Persian rugs for our place today. It feels so incredibly good to be with someone who actually knows how to create a home. I didn't engage. I replied to every single text with the exact same infuriatingly blank phrase. Talk to my lawyer. My lawyer was Mr. Abernathy. He was a 62-year-old veteran of family law. He wore red suspenders, had a thick shock of white hair, and possessed the slow, lethargic demeanor of a sleepy bloodhound, right up until the exact moment he smelled blood in the water. When the official DNA results finally came back, Jude called me. He was sitting in his truck. I could hear him crying over the phone. Deep, racking sobs. He's mine, Jude choked out, his voice cracking. The boy is mine, Tamsin. Bring the notarized paperwork to Abernathy's office tomorrow, I said. I picked the date, I picked the time, I picked the exact room. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late August. The relentless Texas heat was baking the asphalt outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Mr. Abernathy's downtown conference room. Inside, the air conditioning blew a steady, frigid stream of air. The room smelled of old paper, expensive leather, and lemon furniture polish. Vance walked in exactly on time. He was wearing a freshly tailored, light gray suit. He looked incredibly, impossibly smug. He sat down in the heavy leather chair directly across the massive mahogany table from me. He adjusted his silver cufflinks, leaned back, and didn't even bother to look me in the eye. His lawyer, a slick, aggressive guy named Trent, opened a thick leather binder with a loud snap. Let's make this quick and painless, Trent said, clicking his pen. Vance is willing to let Tamsin keep her car and her personal checking savings. In exchange, Vance retains full ownership of the joint Vanguard portfolio, and Tamsin signs a quitclaim deed on the marital home within 30 days. Mr. Abernathy adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. He looked calmly at Trent, then he slowly turned his gaze to Vance. Well now, Abernathy said, his voice slow, deliberate, and thick with Texas gravel. That is a truly fascinating proposal, counselor, especially considering the fact that Mr. Vance here forged my client's digital signature to illegally withdraw $715,400 from that exact Vanguard account 26 days ago. Vance's absolute smugness faltered. Just a microscopic fraction, a twitch in his jaw. Those were my earnings, Vance snapped, his voice tight. I moved them to a secure account to protect my assets from a vindictive spouse. I have a dependent now. I have a new family to provide for. Ah, Abernathy said, holding up a single finger. Yes, the dependent. Abernathy reached down into his battered leather briefcase. He pulled out a crisp, bright white envelope. Time in the room seemed to violently decelerate. I watched Abernathy's hand move at a glacial pace. The white envelope made a soft, abrasive, scratching whisper as it slid across the polished mirror finish of the mahogany table. It slid across the wood until it stopped exactly 1 inch from Vance's manicured hands. I looked at Vance. I really looked at him. I didn't see my husband of 8 years anymore. I saw a solved case. I saw a burned-out warehouse. I saw the exact origin point of the fire. I thought about the thousands of hours I had spent shrinking myself to fit into his life. I thought about the Sunday dinners. I thought about the Airstream blueprints rotting in the dark of my desk drawer. Before we discussed the stolen marital funds, Abernathy said softly, my client felt it was highly prudent to verify the actual liabilities of the marital estate. Vance looked down at the envelope, his brow furrowed. What is this? Open it, I said. It was the first time I had spoken a word since he walked into the room. Vance picked up the envelope. His thumb caught on the glued flap, a tiny tear in the heavy paper. The sound echoed sharply in the quiet, frigid room. He pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. It was the official, notarized laboratory report. The logo of the DNA testing facility was printed in bold blue ink at the top. I watched his face. I watched with clinical, unblinking precision the exact moment the entire architectural structure of his life collapsed. First, the color rapidly drained from his cheeks, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. Then, his mouth opened slightly, his jaw going slack, like he was trying desperately to pull in oxygen. But his lungs had suddenly stopped functioning. His hands started to tremble. The tremor traveled up his wrists. The heavy, premium bond paper rattled loudly against the solid wood table. His eyes darted back and forth as he read the bolded words at the bottom of the page. Probability of paternity, Vance, 0.0%. Alleged father, Jude. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. This is fake, Vance whispered. The booming, confident voice was entirely gone. His voice cracked like dry kindling. This is one of your tricks, Tamsin. You printed this. Cracked like you forged this to mess with my head. I assure you, sir, that is a legally binding, court-admissible document, Abernathy said softly, folding his hands over his stomach. The biological father, a Mr. Jude, has already filed for emergency sole custody in family court at 9 o'clock this morning. He also submitted a sworn, notarized affidavit detailing his exact timeline of physical intimacy with Ms. Cleo. Vance slowly raised his head and looked at me. His eyes were wide, frantic, completely stripped of the heavy armor of arrogance he had worn every day for 8 years. He looked small. She wouldn't, Vance stammered, shaking his head side to side in denial. She loves me. We bought a custom house. We picked out rugs. You bought a house, I corrected him, my voice as cold and flat as the AC blowing from the vents. With my money. Vance stood up abruptly. His heavy leather chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor, a screeching sound that made Trent wince. Vance looked wildly at his lawyer. He looked at me. He looked down at the paper, trembling in his hand. I gave up my dog for this, he whispered, the absolute absurdity of his ruin finally crushing him. I picked up my purse from the floor. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles out of my skirt. I looked down at the man who had physically pinned me against a hospital wall and told me I was nothing but a cold machine. Jude says the baby looks exactly like him, I said. I turned around and walked out of the conference room. I let the heavy oak door click shut behind me. I didn't look back. The cascade over the next 4 months was absolute, brutal, and mathematically precise. Vance drove straight from the mediation room in downtown Austin to the luxury house in Westlake Hills. He burst through the front door and confronted Cleo with the DNA paperwork. Cleo didn't cry. She didn't apologize. According to the text messages Jude showed me later, Cleo simply looked at the paper, packed a single designer duffel bag, called Vance a gullible old man, and ordered an Uber to the airport. She immediately tried to go back to Jude, texting him that she had made a terrible mistake. Jude didn't reply. With the DNA results and her documented abandonment of the child in the car, Jude easily secured full physical custody of his son. He refused to let Cleo step foot inside his apartment. Cleo, having burned every bridge in Austin, ended up moving back into her parents' damp basement in Dallas. Vance was left entirely alone, wandering the echoing halls of a massive, empty, luxury house he couldn't afford. But he didn't even get to keep the empty house. Because he had used forged legal documents to steal protected marital funds, Mr. Abernathy filed a ruthless emergency injunction. The family court judge was furious. The court forced the immediate, rushed liquidation of the West Lake Hills property. Vance was legally ordered to pay back the full $715,400 to my personal accounts, plus all of Abernathy's exorbitant legal fees, plus massive punitive damages for the initial financial fraud. Because the house was sold in a panic, it sold at a loss. Vance had to take out a cripplingly high-interest personal loan just to cover the massive shortfall. His logistics company fired him 2 weeks later. The corporate HR department didn't appreciate the local Austin police detectives showing up at the office to ask questions about potential insurance fraud, since Vance had deliberately used the company health plan to illegally admit Cleo to the maternity ward. He was escorted out of the building by security. The enablers fell too. Bethany, his sister, sent me a long, rambling, multi-paragraph email begging for forgiveness and apologizing for taking Cleo's side. She claimed she had been deceived by Vance's toxic charm and wanted to bring me a casserole. I didn't reply. I didn't even read the whole thing. I just clicked the mouse and forwarded the email directly to my spam folder. Uncle Silas called me on a Tuesday morning, the exact day the judge struck the gavel and the divorce was finalized. "Tamsin," he said over the phone. I could hear the familiar metallic clinking sound of a heavy socket wrench in the background. "Yeah, Uncle Silas? Like I said at the wedding, a dog that bites the mailman will eventually bite you." "You were right," I said, looking out the window of my kitchen. "I usually am," he chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "Now, what exactly are you going to do with all that money the judge forced him to give back?" I smiled. 6 months after the incident at the hospital, Vance tried to contact me one last time. He called from an unknown number. I answered it because I thought it was a new client for the firm. "Tamsin." His voice was thin, reedy, completely broken. The booming bravado was entirely extinguished. "I made a mistake, a massive mistake. I live in a crappy studio apartment near the highway now. I have absolutely nothing. I miss Buster. I miss our Sunday dinners. Can we please just get a cup of coffee?" I stood in the gravel driveway of my new life. "You're living in a fantasy, Vance," I said calmly. "Stop interrogating me." I hung up the phone. I blocked the number. I looked at the driveway. Parked on the crushed white gravel was a vintage 1974 Airstream trailer. The curved aluminum shell was gleaming brilliantly in the hot Texas sun. I had my heavy canvas tool belt strapped around my waist. I had the original blueprint spread out on a folding table, weighed down by a hammer. I am an investigator. I spend my life looking at ruined, burned-out things. But for the very first time in my life, I was building something new. Buster barked happily from inside the gutted trailer. It's a Tuesday afternoon now, 3 years later. I'm sitting in a canvas chair outside the finished Airstream, parked deep in a national park in southern Utah. The red rocks are glowing in the sunset. I'm the only one here. My phone is resting on the wooden picnic table, face up, and nobody's going to text me a lie today.